Hello there, weary traveler, and welcome back to this cozy corner of history where we explore the stories that time tried to bury. Tonight, we're journeying into the surprisingly recent past to uncover why carrying new life in 1950s America was far more dangerous than most of us could ever imagine. A time when the very medical advances meant to protect mothers and babies sometimes became their greatest threats. Whether you're nestled under warm blankets ready to drift off to sleep, or simply seeking to unwind with some gentle historical storytelling, I'm so grateful you've chosen to spend this evening with me. If you don't mind, I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from tonight, and what time of day it is for you right now. Feel free to leave a comment and let me know. It's always such a comfort to see our community of history enthusiasts gathered here from every corner of the globe. And if you find peace in these calm, immersive tales from ages past, go ahead and click that subscribe button so you don't miss our next journey together. But for now, let's allow the gentle weight of modern comfort to settle around you as we travel back to the sterile hospital corridors of 1950s America, where the scent of cigarette smoke mingles with antiseptic, and where the promise of modern medicine carried shadows we're only beginning to understand. Tonight, we're following the story of a young woman named Betty, settling into her hospital bed in 1954, trusting completely in the white-coated authority figures who surround her with confident smiles and revolutionary new treatments. Picture yourself settling deeper into your pillow as we begin this tale of Betty Morrison, a 23-year-old secretary from Minneapolis, 8 months pregnant with her first child. Her hair carefully set in victory rolls despite the hospital gown, her husband Harold waiting nervously in a chair outside, because fathers, of course, were not permitted in delivery rooms. Close your eyes if you wish, and let your breathing slow as we explore together what it meant to carry new life in an era when medical progress moved faster than medical wisdom. Take a deep breath with me now, feeling the softness of your bedding, the warmth of your room, the safety of your walls. Hold on to that comfort as we journey back 70 years to a world where such simple assurances of safety were far more fragile than anyone suspected, and where the mothers and grandmothers in your own family tree navigated pregnancy and childbirth through landscapes of uncertainty that modern medical understanding would find shocking. Betty's story begins not in that hospital room, but 18 months earlier, in the cheerful office of Dr. William Hartwell, whose diplomas hang confidently on wood-paneled walls beneath the soft glow of fluorescent lighting, itself a modern marvel that promised to banish the shadows of medical uncertainty forever. The year is 1953, and Betty has just confirmed what she and Harold have been hoping for. She's pregnant. As you rest comfortably in your bed tonight, imagine Betty's mixture of joy and nervousness as she sits across from Dr. Hartwell, who leans back in his chair and lights a Lucky Strike cigarette while discussing her prenatal care plan. The sight might shock you now, a doctor smoking while discussing pregnancy. But in 1953, this scene played out in medical offices across America without a hint of concern. Dr. Hartwell, like 87% of American physicians according to contemporary medical journals, believed that cigarettes actually helped calm nervous patients and that the modern science behind tobacco processing had eliminated any health concerns. As cigarette advertisements in medical journals proclaimed, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. And the medical establishment saw no contradiction between health and tobacco use. Feel grateful for your clean air tonight, for the simple luxury of breathing freely without the acrid smoke that permeated hospitals, doctors' offices, and even maternity wards throughout the 1950s. Dr. Hartwell's confidence radiates as he outlines Betty's prenatal care, his cigarette ash falling occasionally onto charts that map out the revolutionary approaches to pregnancy management that define modern obstetrics in 1953. Weight gain will be strictly limited, no more than 15 pounds total, he explains, because medical science has determined that larger babies mean more difficult deliveries, And besides, fashionable women of the era pride themselves on maintaining their figures even while pregnant. Betty will receive regular X-rays to monitor the baby's development, because radiation technology represents the cutting edge of prenatal care, allowing doctors to peer inside the womb with unprecedented clarity. She'll take the newest vitamin supplements, enhanced with minerals and hormones that represent the pinnacle of nutritional science. Most excitingly, if she experiences any morning sickness or threat of miscarriage, Dr. Hartwell can prescribe a revolutionary new medication called diethylstilbestrol, DES, a synthetic hormone that medical research has proven prevents pregnancy complications. The drug has been approved by medical authorities and prescribed to millions of women, representing everything modern medicine promises: scientific precision applied to age-old problems, better outcomes through chemistry, progress measured in pill bottles and injection schedules. As you breathe slowly in your safe, modern bedroom, consider how completely Betty trusts this system. She has no reason not to. Dr. Hartwell graduated from one of the finest medical schools in the country. His treatments are backed by peer-reviewed research published in prestigious medical journals. The pharmaceutical companies that produce these medications employ armies of scientists working in gleaming laboratories. This is 1953, and America leads the world in medical innovation. If the experts say something is safe, then surely it must be safe. Betty leaves that first appointment with a prescription for prenatal vitamins, a schedule for regular X-rays, and instructions to limit her weight gain. She also carries with her something less tangible but equally important: complete faith in medical authority. In her world, doctors are unquestioned figures of wisdom, whose white coats represent not just professional training, but near divine insight into the mysteries of human health. The idea that these trusted figures might be wrong, that their confident recommendations might be based on incomplete knowledge, that their certainty might mask dangerous uncertainty, such thoughts simply don't occur to women like Betty, and questioning medical authority would be seen as both foolish and ungrateful. As Betty's pregnancy progresses through those hopeful months of 1953, her experience unfolds within a framework of medical traditions that are simultaneously ancient and startlingly new. The restrictions placed on pregnant women reflect not just medical knowledge, but social expectations that define femininity, motherhood, and a woman's proper role in post-war American society. Every rule she follows, every limitation she accepts, every treatment she receives carries with it assumptions about women's bodies and capabilities that will seem almost unthinkable to later generations. Her weight restriction, for instance, stems from more than just medical theory. The ideal of the modern woman in 1953 includes maintaining a svelte figure throughout pregnancy, demonstrating self-control and social refinement, even while growing new life. Betty dutifully weighs herself each morning on the pink bathroom scale Harold bought for their new suburban home, carefully recording the numbers in a small notebook that she'll show Dr. Hartwell at each appointment. When the scale shows she's gained more than the recommended pound per month, she restricts her eating further, sometimes skipping meals entirely to ensure she stays within the medically prescribed limits. Feel the abundance around you tonight, your access to nutritious food, your freedom to nourish your body according to hunger and health, rather than arbitrary restrictions. Betty's experience of pregnancy hunger, of wanting to eat but restraining herself because medical authority demands it, represents a deprivation that we now know undermined both her health and her baby's development. Yet she accepts this discomfort gladly, even proudly, because following doctor's orders represents not just medical compliance, but moral virtue in her world. The regular X-rays that Dr. Hartwell prescribes seem like miraculous windows into her baby's development. Each month, Betty lies on the cold metal table in the hospital's radiology department, while technicians position the massive X-ray machine above her rounded belly. The machine hums and clicks, filling the air with an electrical smell that will forever remind her of pregnancy appointments. She receives no protective covering for the rest of her body. Lead aprons are reserved for the technicians who operate the equipment, not for patients who receive the radiation. The concept of cumulative radiation exposure, of potential harm to developing cells, simply doesn't exist in the medical understanding of 1953. Instead, these X-rays represent the pinnacle of prenatal care, allowing doctors to measure the baby's skull, estimate its size, and plan for delivery with unprecedented precision. Betty treasures the shadowy images that show her baby's developing bones, carrying the X-ray films home to show Harold and her mother, proud to be receiving such advanced medical attention. The radiation she absorbs during these monthly sessions is equivalent to hundreds of modern chest X-rays, but this knowledge lies decades in the future. Tonight, as you rest without worry about invisible dangers, remember Betty's complete trust in procedures that seemed to represent medical progress, but carried risks that no one yet understood. The prenatal vitamins Dr. Hartwell prescribes come in large, chalky tablets that Betty swallows dutifully each morning with her breakfast coffee. These supplements contain not just the vitamins and minerals that modern prenatal care recognizes as essential, but also experimental additives that 1950s medical science considers beneficial. Synthetic hormones meant to prevent miscarriage, mineral compounds designed to strengthen bones, and chemical preservatives to ensure long shelf life. Some of these additives will later be identified as harmful, others as simply useless. But in 1953, they represent the triumph of chemistry over the uncertainties of natural nutrition. Betty's morning routine includes not just these vitamins, but also the medications that Dr. Hartwell prescribes for the minor discomforts of pregnancy. When she experiences morning sickness during her second month, he gives her a prescription for a new anti-nausea medication that has just received approval for pregnant women. When she feels anxious about the changes in her body, he prescribes mild sedatives to help her maintain the calm demeanor that medical science considers essential for healthy pregnancy. When she mentions that her back aches from the growing weight of her belly, he recommends a muscle relaxant that will help her sleep better. Each of these medications carries the promise of modern pharmaceutical science, specific problems solved by targeted chemical solutions, discomfort eliminated through the precise application of molecular knowledge. Betty takes them gratefully, never questioning their safety or necessity, because questioning would imply doubt in the medical system that represents the height of scientific achievement in her era. Tonight, as you experience whatever small discomforts your own body carries, feel grateful for the careful testing and long-term studies that guide modern medical practice, for the knowledge that comes from decades of observing consequences that women like Betty could never have anticipated. Dr. Hartwell's confidence in his treatment protocols reflects the broader medical culture of 1950s America, where professional authority carries an almost religious weight, and where questioning expert recommendations seems not just inappropriate, but dangerous. In Betty's world, medical knowledge flows downward from learned authorities to grateful patients, and the idea that patients might research their own conditions, seek second opinions, or make informed decisions about their care belongs to an unimaginable future. When Betty attends her monthly prenatal appointments, she sits quietly in Dr. Hartwell's office while he reviews her charts, measures her carefully controlled weight gain, and listens to her baby's heartbeat through a stethoscope placed on her belly. She answers his questions about her symptoms briefly and honestly, but she never thinks to ask questions of her own. What ingredients are in the medications he prescribes? What are the potential side effects of the X-rays she receives? Are there alternative approaches to managing her pregnancy? Such inquiries would seem presumptuous, even offensive, in a relationship built on the assumption that medical knowledge belongs exclusively to those who have earned the right to wear white coats. This dynamic serves not just individual doctors like Dr. Hartwell, but an entire medical establishment that has learned to present uncertainty as certainty, to transform educated guesses into confident recommendations, to frame commercial interests as scientific discoveries. The pharmaceutical companies that manufacture the medications Betty takes employ sophisticated marketing strategies designed specifically to influence physicians' prescribing habits. Medical journals carry advertisements that present new drugs with carefully chosen language that emphasizes benefits while minimizing potential risks. Professional conferences bring together doctors and pharmaceutical representatives in settings that blur the lines between education and sales. Yet Dr. Hartwell genuinely believes in the treatments he recommends for Betty. He has read the research studies that support DES for preventing miscarriage, studies funded by the pharmaceutical companies that manufacture the drug, but presented in prestigious medical journals as objective science. He has attended conferences where respected colleagues share their positive experiences with new prenatal medications. He has seen other patients who seemed to benefit from the treatments he prescribes, and he interprets their outcomes as confirmation of his medical wisdom. The tragedy lies not in any malicious intent, but in the systematic limitations of medical knowledge in 1953. Limitations that are invisible to practitioners who have been trained to project confidence even in the face of uncertainty. Dr. Hartwell cannot know that DES will cause cancers in the daughters of women who take it, cannot predict that the radiation from prenatal X-rays will increase leukemia risks for the children he's trying to protect, cannot anticipate that many of his confident recommendations are based on pharmaceutical marketing rather than rigorous safety testing. As you settle more deeply into your comfortable bed tonight, protected by decades of medical learning that emerged from tragedies like Betty's, consider how much of what seemed like scientific certainty in 1953 would later be revealed as dangerous assumption. The white coat that Dr. Hartwell wears represents not omniscience, but the accumulated ignorance of his era, dressed in the clothing of professional authority, and presented with the confidence that medical culture demands from its practitioners. Betty's trust in this system reflects not naivety, but rational adaptation to the world she inhabits. In 1953, medical authority represents the best available knowledge, the most advanced thinking, the closest approximation to scientific truth that her society can provide. She has no way of knowing that this authority rests on foundations that are far more fragile than they appear, that many of the treatments she receives represent experiments disguised as established practice, that the confidence of her medical providers masks uncertainties that won't be acknowledged for decades. As Betty's pregnancy progresses into its 6th month, her faith in medical science deepens with each successful appointment, each reassuring interaction with Dr. Hartwell, each tablet she swallows in pursuit of the healthiest possible pregnancy. She has no way of knowing that she is participating in one of the largest uncontrolled medical experiments in human history, that her body and her developing baby are testing grounds for pharmaceutical innovations whose long-term effects remain completely unknown. The DES pills that Dr. Hartwell prescribes to prevent miscarriage represent everything that seems wonderful about modern chemistry applied to age-old medical problems. Diethylstilbestrol is a synthetic hormone that mimics estrogen in the human body, developed in laboratories and tested in animals before being approved for human use. The research that supports its use in pregnancy is extensive and seemingly thorough. Studies showing reduced miscarriage rates, improved birth weights, healthier placentas. Medical journals publish papers with impressive statistical analyses demonstrating DES's effectiveness. Pharmaceutical companies provide detailed safety data to regulatory agencies. What no one knows in 1953 is that the children of women who take DES during pregnancy will face dramatically increased risks of reproductive cancers as they reach adulthood. The daughters will develop clear cell adenocarcinoma of the vagina and cervix at rates far higher than the general population. The sons will show increased rates of testicular abnormalities and reduced fertility. These effects will take 20 to 30 years to manifest, appearing long after Dr. Hartwell has retired and Betty has raised her children and become a grandmother herself. Tonight, as you breathe easily in your safe bedroom, consider the terrible patience of these chemical time bombs. Betty takes her DES pills with breakfast each morning, grateful for the protection they provide, never imagining that she is exposing her daughter to cancers that won't appear until the 1980s. The medication tastes slightly bitter, but she washes it down with orange juice and feels virtuous about following her doctor's recommendations so carefully. She saves the empty pill bottles in a small box in her bedroom closet, planning to show them to her daughter someday as evidence of the excellent prenatal care that ensured her healthy birth. The other medications that fill Betty's daily routine carry their own hidden burdens. The anti-nausea pills that helped her through her first trimester contain compounds that will later be linked to birth defects. The sedatives that help her sleep contain barbiturates that can affect fetal brain development. The vitamin supplements include artificial additives that her baby's developing organs have no evolutionary preparation for processing. Each tablet represents the optimistic application of chemical knowledge to biological problems, the confident assumption that synthetic molecules can improve upon millions of years of human reproductive evolution. Betty's daily medication routine becomes a ritual of faith in scientific progress. She arranges her pills each morning in a small glass dish beside her breakfast plate, taking them in the order that Dr. Hartwell specified, with the timing that pharmaceutical instructions recommend. She feels modern and sophisticated, part of a generation that can harness chemistry to optimize health outcomes in ways that previous generations could never imagine. Her mother's pregnancies were managed with rest and folk wisdom. Betty's pregnancy benefits from the latest discoveries of laboratory science. The irony, invisible to everyone in 1953, is that Betty's mother's more natural approach to pregnancy actually provided greater safety for both mother and child. The absence of pharmaceutical intervention, the reliance on body wisdom rather than chemical manipulation, the trust in evolutionary processes rather than laboratory innovations, these apparently primitive approaches avoided the hidden dangers that lurked within seemingly advanced medical treatments. Yet Betty cannot know this, and her choices make perfect sense within the context of her time. She has access to medical advances that previous generations could only dream of, treatments backed by scientific research and professional expertise. To reject these advances in favor of older approaches would seem not just foolish but ungrateful, a betrayal of the progress that medical science has achieved for the benefit of mothers and babies everywhere. As your breathing slows and deepens in your comfortable bed tonight, feel grateful for the decades of careful study and tragic experience that now protect pregnant women from the hidden dangers that Betty faced unknowingly. Her trust in medical authority, her willingness to participate in treatments that seemed scientifically sound, her faith in the promise of pharmaceutical progress, all of these represent rational responses to the best information available in her era, even though that information would later prove incomplete and sometimes fatally flawed. The medical culture surrounding Betty's pregnancy creates an atmosphere of confidence and control that makes questioning or doubt seem not just unnecessary, but actively harmful. Hospital corridors smell of antiseptic and floor wax, creating an environment that feels sterile and scientific. Nurses wear crisp white uniforms with caps that symbolize professional training and medical competence. Doctors carry stethoscopes and speak in confident voices about treatment protocols and expected outcomes. Everything about the medical environment reinforces the message that science has tamed the uncertainties of pregnancy and childbirth, that modern knowledge has replaced ancient anxieties with reliable procedures and predictable results. Betty's monthly appointments follow a ritual that reinforces this sense of medical mastery. She waits in a reception area decorated with cheerful images of healthy babies and smiling mothers, reading magazines that feature articles about the latest advances in prenatal care. When her name is called, She follows a nurse down hallways lined with diplomas and medical certificates, visual reminders of the extensive training that qualifies these professionals to manage her pregnancy. In the examination room, she changes into a hospital gown and lies on a padded table while Dr. Hartwell performs examinations that seem thorough and scientific. The measurements that Dr. Hartwell takes during each visit, her weight, blood pressure, the size of her abdomen, the position of her baby, are recorded on charts that create the impression of precise monitoring and careful documentation. These numbers are compared to standard ranges that medical science has established for healthy pregnancies, and any variations are addressed with specific interventions designed to optimize outcomes. The entire process feels systematic and comprehensive, leaving no room for the uncertainties and anxieties that plagued previous generations of pregnant women. Yet beneath this surface of scientific confidence lies a reality that is far more uncertain and experimental than anyone acknowledges in 1953. Many of the standard ranges that guide medical decisions are based on limited studies of white, middle-class women, with little consideration for how different populations might experience pregnancy differently. The interventions that doctors recommend for variations from these standards often lack long-term safety data, representing educated guesses presented as established medical facts. The confidence that medical professionals project masks the fundamental truth that pregnancy and childbirth remain largely mysterious biological processes that resist complete medical control. Dr. Hartwell genuinely believes in the effectiveness of his treatments because the medical culture of his era provides no framework for acknowledging uncertainty. His medical training emphasized the importance of projecting confidence to inspire patient trust, and his professional environment rewards decisive action over cautious observation. Medical journals publish studies that emphasize positive results while downplaying limitations or potential risks. Pharmaceutical companies provide information about their products that highlights benefits while minimizing concerns. Professional conferences showcase success stories while overlooking complications or failures. This culture of confidence serves important psychological functions for both doctors and patients. Betty needs to believe that medical science can protect her and her baby from the dangers that have threatened pregnant women throughout history. Dr. Hartwell needs to believe that his training and knowledge enable him to provide effective care for his patients. The entire medical establishment needs to maintain public faith in scientific progress and professional competence. Acknowledging the limitations and uncertainties that actually characterize medical knowledge in 1953 would undermine these crucial belief systems. As you rest peacefully tonight, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom of decades of medical learning, consider how much courage it must have taken for Betty to trust so completely in a system that was still learning how to protect mothers and babies. Her faith in medical authority represents not ignorance, but hope, not gullibility, but the rational decision to trust the best available knowledge of her time. The tragedies that would later emerge from some of her treatments were invisible in 1953, hidden within processes that took decades to unfold and reveal their true effects. The antiseptic smell of Betty's hospital visits carries with it not just the promise of cleanliness, but the hope that scientific rigor could eliminate the ancient dangers of childbirth. The white coats worn by her medical providers symbolize not just professional training, but society's faith that human knowledge could overcome biological uncertainty. The confident voices that discuss her care reflect not arrogance, but the desperate desire to believe that medical progress had finally tamed the fears that had haunted pregnant women since the beginning of time. As Betty enters her 8th month of pregnancy in early 1954, her trust in medical science faces its greatest test during what should be routine prenatal care. Dr. Hartwell recommends a new procedure that represents the cutting edge of obstetric practice: pelvimetry, a detailed X-ray examination of her pelvis designed to determine whether she can safely deliver her baby naturally or will require a cesarean section. The procedure involves multiple X-ray exposures from different angles, creating a comprehensive picture of her bone structure that will guide delivery planning with unprecedented precision. The pelvimetry appointment takes place in the hospital's newest radiology suite, where gleaming equipment represents the latest advances in medical imaging technology. Betty lies on the cold metal table while technicians position the massive X-ray machine above and around her body, taking images from multiple angles to capture every detail of her pelvic bones. The machine hums and whirs as it takes exposure after exposure, filling the air with the electrical smell that has become familiar from her monthly prenatal X-rays. She receives no protection for her body or her baby. The concept of shielding pregnant women from radiation simply doesn't exist in 1954 medical practice. The radiation exposure from this single pelvimetry session equals several hundred modern chest X-rays, delivering a dose that would be considered dangerous by today's standards. But in 1954, radiation is viewed as a miraculous diagnostic tool with no significant risks, especially compared to the traditional alternative of attempting delivery without knowing whether the baby's head can pass through the mother's pelvis. Dr. Hartwell explains the procedure as a simple precaution that will ensure the safest possible delivery. And Betty agrees gratefully, proud to be receiving such advanced medical attention. What no one knows in 1954 is that the radiation from prenatal X-rays increases childhood leukemia risk significantly, with effects that won't become apparent for years after birth. The developing cells in Betty's baby are particularly vulnerable to radiation damage, and the multiple exposures she receives during her pregnancy represent a level of radiation that will later be recognized as dangerous for developing fetuses. These effects will take years to manifest, and even longer to be recognized by medical researchers, appearing as increased cancer rates in children born during the 1950s peak of prenatal radiation use. Feel grateful tonight for the ultrasound technology that now provides safe imaging of developing babies, for the careful protocols that minimize radiation exposure during pregnancy, for the decades of research that revealed the hidden dangers of practices that seemed progressive in their time. Betty's pelvimetry session feels sophisticated and scientifically advanced, but it represents an experiment in radiation exposure whose consequences won't be understood for decades. The results of Betty's pelvimetry lead Dr. Hartwell to recommend another innovation that exemplifies 1950s obstetric practice: prophylactic episiotomy. Medical theory in 1954 holds that cutting the perineum during delivery prevents more severe tears and speeds healing, and that all first-time mothers should receive this procedure regardless of whether natural tearing seems likely. The cut will be made with surgical precision rather than allowing the chaotic trauma of natural birth, representing the triumph of medical intervention over biological unpredictability. Betty accepts this recommendation without question, trusting that surgical intervention represents an improvement over natural processes that medical science has identified as inadequate. The idea that her body might be designed to stretch and accommodate childbirth without routine cutting seems primitive compared to the precise surgical management that modern obstetrics provides. Dr. Hartwell's confidence in this procedure reflects the broader medical belief that surgical intervention improves upon biological processes, that professional expertise can optimize outcomes that nature leaves to chance. Unknown to Betty or Dr. Hartwell, routine episiotomy actually increases the risk of severe tears, prolongs healing time, and creates complications that natural birth rarely produces. The procedure represents medical intervention based on theoretical assumptions rather than careful outcome studies, confident application of surgical techniques without adequate research into their effects. These problems won't be recognized for decades, during which millions of women will undergo unnecessary surgical procedures that create more problems than they solve. The pattern repeats throughout Betty's prenatal care. Innovations that seem scientifically advanced but lack adequate testing. Procedures that feel modern and precise but rest on theoretical foundations rather than empirical evidence, treatments that project medical confidence while masking fundamental uncertainty about their effects. Each intervention represents the sincere attempt to improve pregnancy outcomes through the application of emerging medical knowledge, yet many of these attempts will later be recognized as harmful or unnecessary. Tonight, as you rest in the knowledge that modern medical practice is built on decades of careful outcome studies and evidence-based protocols, remember Betty's brave trust in a medical system that was still learning how to separate genuine advances from dangerous assumptions. Her willingness to accept new procedures and treatments reflected not recklessness, but rational faith in scientific progress, even when that progress moved faster than wisdom. Betty's experience of pregnancy in 1954 unfolds within a social environment that shapes not just her medical choices, but her understanding of motherhood itself. The women in her community, neighbors, relatives, friends from church and work, create an informal network of shared experience and mutual support that both reinforces and complicates the medical guidance she receives from Dr. Hartwell. These relationships provide emotional comfort and practical advice, but they also transmit assumptions about pregnancy and childbirth that may not serve women's actual health needs. Her mother, Margaret, who gave birth to 5 children during the 1920s and 1930s, represents an older approach to pregnancy that Betty has been taught to view as outdated and potentially dangerous. Margaret's pregnancies were managed by a family doctor who made house calls and relied primarily on observation and natural processes rather than pharmaceutical interventions. She gained whatever weight her body demanded, ate according to her appetite rather than medical restrictions, and received no X-rays or routine medications. Her labors took place at home with the assistance of a midwife and her female relatives, in an environment that emphasized comfort and emotional support rather than medical efficiency. Margaret watches her daughter's pregnancy with a mixture of pride and concern, pleased that Betty has access to modern medical care, but sometimes puzzled by the restrictions and interventions that seem to define contemporary obstetric practice. When Betty mentions that Dr. Hartwell has limited her weight gain to 15 pounds, Margaret frowns and remarks that she gained nearly 30 pounds with each of her pregnancies and delivered healthy babies without complications. When Betty describes the monthly X-rays that monitor her baby's development, Margaret wonders aloud why such monitoring is necessary when women have been giving birth successfully for thousands of years without it. These conversations create subtle tensions that Betty struggles to navigate. She loves and respects her mother, but has been taught to view older approaches to pregnancy as primitive and potentially dangerous. The medical authorities she trusts have assured her that modern obstetric care represents a clear improvement over previous practices, that scientific knowledge has identified and corrected the errors that endangered earlier generations of mothers and babies. To follow her mother's advice rather than doctor, Hartwell's recommendations would feel like choosing ignorance over expertise, tradition over progress. Betty's friends and neighbors, most of whom are also having babies during the 1950s baby boom, generally reinforce her faith in modern medical practices. They share stories of successful pregnancies managed by respected doctors, compare notes on the latest prenatal vitamins and medications, and discuss the convenience and safety of hospital deliveries compared to the home births that their mothers experienced. These conversations create a sense of participating in medical progress, of being part of a generation that benefits from scientific advances that previous generations could only dream of. Yet even within this community of modern mothers, subtle variations in medical advice create confusion and concern. Betty's friend Susan has been told by her doctor to gain no more than 12 pounds during pregnancy, while another friend, Helen, has been advised that 18 pounds is acceptable. Susan's doctor recommends daily doses of a hormone supplement that Helen's doctor has never mentioned. Helen receives X-rays every 2 weeks to monitor her baby's position, while Betty's monthly X-rays seem almost conservative by comparison. These differences suggest that medical science is less unified and certain than the confident presentations of individual doctors might suggest. The baby shower that Betty's friends organized during her 8th month reflects the consumer culture that surrounds 1950s pregnancy and child rearing. The gifts include the latest in nursery technology, cribs painted with lead-based paint that creates beautiful, durable finishes, baby powder made with talc that may contain asbestos fibers, bottles and feeding equipment made with plastics that contain chemicals whose long-term effects remain unknown. Each gift represents the sincere desire to provide the best possible care for Betty's coming baby, but many of these improvements over traditional childcare methods will later be recognized as health hazards. Feel grateful tonight for the consumer safety regulations that now protect babies from the hidden dangers that lurked within products that seemed safe and modern in 1954. Betty's nursery, decorated with the latest innovations in infant care, contains hazards that no one suspects: lead paint that will chip and be ingested by crawling babies, asbestos-containing products that will release harmful fibers into nursery air, chemical plastics that will leach compounds into formula and food. Her careful preparation for motherhood includes dangers that she cannot imagine and has no way to avoid. The advice that circulates within Betty's community of mothers combines medical recommendations with folk wisdom, scientific claims with traditional practices, pharmaceutical marketing with genuine care and concern. Women share tips about managing morning sickness, discuss the relative merits of different doctors and hospitals, and compare their experiences with new medications and procedures. This informal network provides emotional support and practical guidance, but it also transmits misinformation and reinforces medical assumptions that may not serve women's actual needs. As you settle more deeply into sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety that comes from decades of consumer protection and medical research, remember the courage of women like Betty, who created families during an era when the promises of modern science often masked dangers that would take decades to understand. Their trust in medical progress and consumer innovation reflected hope rather than naivety, rational adaptation to the best available knowledge rather than blind faith in authority. The hospital where Betty will deliver her baby represents everything that 1954 American society admires about medical progress and institutional efficiency. St. Mary's Hospital is a modern facility built just 5 years earlier with the latest in medical design and equipment. The maternity ward occupies an entire floor, with labor rooms equipped with the newest monitoring devices, delivery rooms that resemble surgical suites in their sterile efficiency, and recovery areas designed to promote rest and healing under professional supervision. Everything about the environment reinforces the message that childbirth has been transformed from a natural biological process into a medical procedure that requires institutional management and professional expertise. The labor rooms at St. Mary's feature the newest innovation in obstetric care, continuous electronic monitoring that tracks both fetal heartbeat and maternal contractions throughout labor. Betty will be connected to machines that provide real-time information about her baby's condition, allowing medical staff to identify problems immediately and intervene if necessary. These monitors represent the pinnacle of 1950s medical technology, offering unprecedented insight into the progress of labor and the safety of both mother and child. What Betty and her medical team cannot know is that continuous electronic monitoring during labor will later be found to increase the rate of cesarean sections without improving outcomes for mothers or babies. The machines detect variations in fetal heart rate that often represent normal responses to labor rather than signs of distress, leading to unnecessary surgical interventions based on incomplete understanding of what the monitoring data actually means. But in 1954, these monitors represent the triumph of objective measurement over subjective observation, scientific precision over biological uncertainty. Dr. Hartwell's authority within this institutional setting is absolute and unquestioned. When Betty arrives at the hospital in labor, she enters a world where his medical judgments guide every aspect of her experience. Nurses follow his orders without discussion, implement his treatment protocols without deviation, and reinforce his decisions with patients and families. The hierarchy that structures hospital operations ensures that medical authority flows downward from physicians to nurses to patients, with each level expected to defer to the expertise of those above. This hierarchical structure serves important functions in maintaining institutional efficiency and medical authority, but it also eliminates opportunities for questioning or alternative perspectives that might improve patient care. When Betty expresses concern about a procedure or discomfort with a medication, her worries are addressed through reassurance rather than explanation, through appeals to medical authority rather than detailed discussion of risks and benefits. The assumption that patients lack the knowledge necessary to participate in medical decision-making creates a system where trust substitutes for understanding, compliance replaces collaboration. The physical design of St. Mary's maternity ward reinforces these power relationships through architectural choices that separate medical staff from patients, professionals from families, institutional authority from personal autonomy. Betty's labor room contains medical equipment but lacks personal comforts, reflecting the belief that childbirth is primarily a medical event rather than a family experience. Harold will be excluded from the delivery room entirely, waiting in a separate area where fathers pace nervously while their wives give birth under professional supervision. This separation of families during childbirth represents one of the most significant changes that institutional delivery has brought to the experience of having babies. For thousands of years, women gave birth surrounded by female relatives and friends who provided emotional support, practical assistance, and cultural continuity. The 1950s hospital model replaces this community support with professional care, trading family presence for medical expertise, personal relationships for institutional efficiency. Betty enters this system with complete faith in its ability to protect her and her baby, unaware that she is participating in a massive transformation of human birth practices, whose consequences will take decades to fully understand. The institutional efficiency that impresses her masks the loss of ancient wisdom about birth as a natural process that unfolds best when supported by patience, presence, and trust in biological rhythms rather than technological intervention. The delivery room where Betty will give birth looks more like an operating theater than a birthing space, with bright surgical lights, stainless steel equipment, and the antiseptic atmosphere that defines modern medical practice. This environment sends clear messages about how childbirth should be understood as a medical procedure requiring sterile conditions, professional intervention, and technological assistance rather than as a natural process that women's bodies have evolved to manage successfully. The room contains no comfortable furniture, no personal items, no accommodation for family presence, only the equipment and environment necessary for medical management of a biological event. As you breathe deeply in your comfortable bed tonight, feel grateful for the birthing centers and family-centered hospital rooms that now honor both medical safety and personal comfort during labor and delivery. Betty's delivery room, designed according to 1950s medical priorities, will strip away every element of comfort and familiarity that might help her cope with the intensity of labor, replacing them with technological monitoring and pharmaceutical management that treats birth as a medical emergency rather than a normal life event. When Betty's labor begins on a cold February morning in 1954, her experience unfolds according to protocols that represent everything 1950s medicine considers advanced and humane about obstetric care. Upon arriving at St. Mary's Hospital, she is immediately given an injection of morphine to manage her labor pain, followed by scopolamine, a combination known as twilight sleep, that was developed to eliminate the suffering that medical authorities consider unnecessary and potentially harmful for both mothers and babies. Twilight sleep represents one of the most confident applications of pharmaceutical science to the ancient challenge of labor pain. The morphine provides pain relief, while the scopolamine creates a state of semi-consciousness that prevents the formation of memories about labor and delivery. Women who receive twilight sleep often wake up hours after birth with no recollection of the experience, having been unconscious during their baby's arrival into the world. Medical literature describes this as a humane advance that spares mothers from traumatic memories while ensuring complete medical control over the delivery process. Betty receives her twilight sleep injection with gratitude, trusting that medical science has finally solved the problem of labor pain that has plagued women throughout history. As the medications take effect, her awareness dims and her memory formation stops, leaving her medical team in complete control of her labor and delivery. She becomes a passive participant in her own childbirth, unable to make decisions or respond to changes in her condition, dependent entirely on medical professionals to manage the birth of her baby. What no one realizes in 1954 is that twilight sleep often creates more problems than it solves. The combination of morphine and scopolamine can slow labor progress, depress fetal heart rates, and create complications that require additional medical interventions. Women under twilight sleep may thrash around violently despite being unconscious, requiring physical restraints that can cause injuries. The medications cross the placenta and affect baby's breathing and alertness at birth, sometimes creating the very emergencies that the drugs were meant to prevent. But in Betty's case, as in thousands of others during the 1950s, twilight sleep seems to work exactly as promised. Her labor progresses under careful medical supervision while she remains blissfully unaware of the process. Dr. Hartwell monitors her contractions and her baby's heartbeat using the latest electronic equipment, making decisions about her care without needing to consult with a patient who cannot participate in conversations about her own birth experience. As you rest peacefully tonight, conscious and in control of your own experience, consider what it meant for women like Betty to surrender, not just their comfort, but their consciousness to medical authority during one of the most significant moments of their lives. The promise of painless childbirth came at the cost of awareness and participation, trading suffering for absence, control for unconsciousness. The episiotomy that Dr. Hartwell performs during Betty's delivery represents another confident application of surgical precision to biological processes that medical science considers inadequate or dangerous. While Betty remains unconscious under twilight sleep, he makes a careful incision to prevent what he believes would be more severe natural tearing, then delivers her baby with forceps to ensure precise control over the final moments of birth. The entire process unfolds according to medical protocols designed to optimize outcomes through professional intervention rather than biological processes. Betty's baby, a healthy daughter weighing 6 pounds 12 ounces, arrives into this medicalized environment without her mother's conscious participation or awareness. The infant's first moments are managed by medical professionals who suction her airways, administer eye medications to prevent infection, and perform examinations to assess her health status. She is cleaned, weighed, measured, and wrapped before being taken to the hospital nursery, where she will spend her first days under professional supervision rather than in her mother's arms. When Betty awakens several hours after delivery, she has no memory of her daughter's birth and must be told that the baby has arrived safely. This gap in memory, presented as a blessing that spares her from painful recollections, actually represents a profound loss of one of the most significant experiences in human life. She has missed her baby's first cry, first breath, first moments of life outside the womb, experiences that connect mothers and babies and establish early bonds that nature designed to develop immediately after birth. The medications that created Betty's twilight sleep continue to affect both her and her baby for days after delivery. Betty experiences confusion and disorientation as the drugs clear from her system, while her daughter shows the sluggish responses and feeding difficulties that often result from maternal medication during labor. These effects are considered normal and temporary by medical staff. Side effects that are acceptable given the benefits of pain-free delivery and medical control over the birth process. Feel grateful tonight for the natural birth movements and family-centered care practices that now honor women's desire to remain conscious and participatory during their children's births. Betty's experience of missed motherhood, of being absent from her own baby's arrival, represents a medical approach that prioritized institutional efficiency over human connection, pharmaceutical management over natural processes, professional control over personal experience. Betty's daughter spends her first week of life in St. Mary's Hospital Nursery, a gleaming facility that represents everything 1950s medical science considers optimal for newborn care. The nursery features rows of metal bassinets arranged with military precision, each containing a baby wrapped tightly in white hospital blankets and positioned for easy observation by nursing staff. Large windows allow parents to view their babies from a distance, but physical contact is strictly limited to scheduled feeding times when mothers are brought to a separate room for supervised breastfeeding sessions. This institutional approach to newborn care reflects medical theories about infection control, feeding schedules, and infant development that seem scientifically advanced in 1954, but will later be recognized as harmful to both babies and mothers. The separation of mothers and babies during the crucial first days of life interferes with the establishment of breastfeeding, disrupts the natural bonding process that evolution designed to occur immediately after birth, and creates unnecessary stress for both mothers and infants who are biologically programmed to remain close together. The feeding schedule imposed in St. Mary's Nursery requires babies to eat every 4 hours, whether they seem hungry or not, with no feeding permitted between these scheduled times, even if infants cry persistently from hunger. This rigid scheduling reflects medical beliefs about the importance of establishing routine and avoiding overfeeding, but it contradicts the natural feeding patterns that support successful breastfeeding and healthy infant growth. Babies who cry between scheduled feedings receive bottles of sugar water rather than access to their mother's milk, disrupting the supply and demand relationship that establishes abundant milk production. Betty's attempts to breastfeed her daughter take place in a sterile room where mothers sit in straight-backed chairs while nurses supervise feeding sessions and record the duration of each attempt. The medical staff provides conflicting advice about breastfeeding techniques, often recommending practices that interfere with successful nursing. Washing breasts with soap before each feeding, limiting nursing sessions to prevent sore nipples, supplementing with formula to ensure adequate nutrition. These interventions, presented as scientific improvements over instinctive feeding practices, actually create the very problems they are meant to prevent. When Betty's milk supply struggles to establish itself under these artificial conditions, medical staff recommends switching to formula feeding as a more reliable and scientific approach to infant nutrition. Formula in 1954 is marketed as a modern improvement over breast milk, a precisely calibrated nutritional product that eliminates the uncertainties and potential inadequacies of natural feeding. The decision to bottle feed is presented not as a medical failure, but as a rational choice that embraces scientific advancement over biological processes. The formula that Betty's daughter receives contains corn syrup, evaporated milk, and water mixed according to precise medical specifications and served in bottles that have been sterilized to eliminate bacterial contamination. This artificial nutrition lacks the antibodies, hormones, and complex nutrients that breast milk provides, but medical science in 1954 considers these missing elements either unnecessary or replaceable through pharmaceutical supplements. The baby receives vitamin drops, iron supplements, and other additives meant to compensate for the nutritional limitations of formula feeding. As you rest comfortably tonight, breathing air that your body trusts and processes naturally, consider how Betty's daughter spent her earliest days receiving artificial nutrition from plastic bottles rather than the biological nourishment that her mother's body had prepared specifically for her needs. The confidence with which medical authorities recommended formula over breast milk reflects the broader 1950s faith in industrial solutions to biological challenges, the belief that human innovation could improve upon natural processes through chemical precision and technological control. The nursery environment itself exposes newborns to chemicals and materials that seem safe and modern in 1954, but will later be recognized as health hazards. The baby blankets are treated with flame retardants that contain toxic compounds. The plastic bottles contain chemicals that leach into formula, and the nursery air carries traces of the pesticides and cleaning products that maintain the sterile environment that medical science considers essential for infant health. Each of these exposures represents small doses of compounds that accumulating research will link to developmental problems, immune system dysfunction, and increased cancer risks. Betty's daughter also receives routine medical procedures that reflect 1950s assumptions about disease prevention and health optimization. She is given silver nitrate drops in her eyes to prevent infection, vitamin K injections to prevent bleeding disorders, and early vaccines according to the latest immunization schedules. While some of these interventions provide genuine benefits, others represent pharmaceutical solutions to problems that occur rarely and might be managed differently. Medical interventions that prioritize theoretical protection over careful assessment of risks and benefits. The separation of Betty and her daughter during these crucial early days represents one of the most profound disruptions that institutional birth practices created in the ancient relationship between mothers and babies. For millions of years, human infants remained close to their mothers after birth, nursing frequently, sleeping together, and establishing the complex biological and emotional connections that support healthy development. The 1950s hospital model replaces this evolutionary wisdom with artificial schedules, institutional efficiency, and pharmaceutical management that treats natural processes as problems requiring professional solutions. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep in an environment that supports your natural rhythms and biological needs, remember Betty's daughter spending her first week in a world of artificial lighting, scheduled feeding, and institutional routines that ignored the biological imperatives that connect mothers and babies. The nursery that seemed so modern and scientific in 1954 created obstacles to the very outcomes it was designed to promote: healthy babies, successful feeding, and strong family bonds. As Betty recovers from her delivery and prepares to take her daughter home, she carries with her not just a new baby, but the invisible effects of medical interventions that will influence both their lives for decades to come. The DES she took during pregnancy has altered her daughter's reproductive development in ways that won't become apparent until the child reaches adolescence and young adulthood. The radiation from her prenatal X-rays has increased her daughter's cancer risk by amounts that won't be measurable for years. The twilight sleep medications have affected her own recovery and her baby's early neurological development in subtle ways that medical science in 1954 cannot detect or measure. These delayed consequences represent one of the most tragic aspects of 1950s medical practice: the gap between confident intervention and actual understanding of long-term effects. Dr. Hartwell and his colleagues genuinely believe that they are providing the best possible care for their patients, implementing treatments that medical research supports and professional consensus endorses. They cannot know that many of their confident recommendations are based on incomplete knowledge, that their interventions often create problems that won't appear for decades, that their faith in pharmaceutical solutions sometimes subjects patients to risks that far outweigh potential benefits. Betty returns home to her suburban Minneapolis house with a medicine cabinet full of prescriptions meant to support her recovery and her daughter's healthy development. She takes hormone supplements to restore her energy levels, antibiotics to prevent infection from her episiotomy, and pain medications to manage her discomfort. Her daughter receives vitamin drops, iron supplements, and formula preparations that represent the latest advances in infant nutrition. Each medication reflects medical science's confidence in pharmaceutical solutions to biological challenges, yet many of these interventions create side effects and dependencies that natural recovery processes would avoid. The baby equipment that fills their nursery, crib, changing table, high chair, toys, contains materials and chemicals that seem safe and modern in 1954, but will later be recognized as health hazards. The crib is painted with lead-based paint that creates a beautiful, durable finish while exposing crawling babies to neurotoxic compounds that can affect brain development. The mattress contains flame retardants that release toxic gases into nursery air. The plastic toys and bottles contain chemicals that leach into babies' mouths and bodies, disrupting hormonal development and immune system function. Betty's daily routine with her daughter includes products and practices that medical authorities recommend as improvements over traditional childcare methods. She uses baby powder made with talc that may contain asbestos fibers, applies lotions and creams that contain chemical preservatives and artificial fragrances, and feeds her daughter from bottles that have been sterilized with chemical solutions. Each of these practices seems scientifically advanced and hygienically superior to older approaches, yet each also exposes her baby to chemical compounds that her developing systems have no evolutionary preparation for processing. As you breathe easily in your safe bedroom tonight, surrounded by products that have been tested for safety and regulated to protect consumers, consider how Betty and her daughter navigated daily life surrounded by hidden chemical hazards that no one suspected. Their careful attention to modern hygiene and scientific childcare included exposures to toxic compounds that would accumulate in their bodies over years and decades, creating health problems that wouldn't be linked to these early exposures until much later in their lives. The social environment surrounding Betty's new motherhood reinforces many of the medical assumptions that guide her choices. Her neighbors and friends share advice about infant care that emphasizes cleanliness over natural immunity, scheduled feeding over responsive nursing, pharmaceutical solutions over biological processes. The magazines she reads feature advertisements for products that promise to improve upon natural mothering through scientific innovation, better nutrition through formula feeding, superior hygiene through chemical products, enhanced development through educational toys, and scheduled activities. This cultural embrace of scientific motherhood reflects the broader 1950s faith in technological progress and professional expertise, the belief that human problems could be solved through industrial innovation and chemical precision. Betty and her contemporaries genuinely want to provide the best possible care for their children, and they rationally choose approaches that seem most advanced and scientifically sound. They cannot know that many of these modern improvements actually interfere with natural processes that support healthy child development, that their embrace of pharmaceutical and chemical solutions sometimes creates the very problems they hope to prevent. The medical follow-up care that Betty and her daughter receive during their first year reflects the systematic application of professional monitoring to biological processes that previous generations managed through family knowledge and community support. Regular pediatric appointments track the baby's growth against standardized charts, identify variations from normal development, and recommend interventions to optimize health outcomes. Betty receives ongoing gynecological care that monitors her recovery, adjusts her medications, and addresses complications from her delivery procedures. This intensive medical monitoring creates the impression of comprehensive care and scientific precision, yet it also medicalizes normal variations in human development and recovery that might resolve naturally without intervention. When Betty's daughter shows feeding difficulties that stem from their interrupted early bonding and artificial nursery environment, pediatric authorities recommend pharmaceutical solutions rather than addressing the underlying disruption of natural feeding relationships. When Betty experiences mood changes and fatigue that reflect normal hormonal adjustments after childbirth, medical providers prescribe medications rather than supporting the natural recovery processes that time and rest would facilitate. Feel grateful tonight for the decades of research that now guide medical practice toward evidence-based interventions that support rather than interfere with natural biological processes. Betty's experience of intensive medical management during pregnancy, delivery, and early motherhood represents sincere attempts to improve health outcomes through professional intervention. Yet many of these attempts created obstacles to the very health and bonding they were meant to promote. As Betty's daughter grows through her first year, the accumulating effects of 1950s medical practices create subtle but significant impacts on both their health and their relationship that will influence their lives for decades to come. The early separation and artificial feeding that characterized the baby's first days interfered with the establishment of secure attachment and successful breastfeeding, creating ongoing challenges that Betty experiences as personal failures rather than systemic problems with institutional birth practices. The bottle feeding that medical authorities recommended as superior to breastfeeding creates ongoing digestive problems for Betty's daughter, who suffers from frequent stomach upsets, gas, and sleep disturbances that her formula-fed system struggles to manage. Betty responds to these problems by switching between different formula preparations, adding supplements recommended by pediatric authorities, and accepting that feeding difficulties are normal challenges of infant care rather than consequences of departing from evolutionary feeding relationships. The chemical exposures that surround the baby's daily life, from the lead paint in her crib, to the asbestos in her baby powder, to the preservatives in her formula, accumulate in her developing body at levels that seem insignificant in 1954, but will contribute to health problems decades later. These toxic burdens interact with each other and with her genetic vulnerabilities in ways that won't be understood until environmental medicine develops sophisticated tools for measuring cumulative chemical impacts on human health. Betty's own recovery from childbirth reflects the complications created by routine medical interventions that seemed beneficial in 1954, but actually interfered with natural healing processes. Her episiotomy creates ongoing pain and sexual dysfunction that affects her marriage and her confidence in her own body. The hormonal medications she takes to support her recovery create dependencies and side effects that prolong rather than accelerate her return to health. The separation from her baby during crucial early bonding periods creates ongoing anxiety and uncertainty about her maternal capabilities. These individual experiences, multiplied across millions of families during the 1950s baby boom, represent one of the largest uncontrolled medical experiments in human history. An entire generation of mothers and babies participated in practices that medical authorities confidently recommended based on theoretical assumptions rather than careful long-term outcome studies. The consequences of this mass experiment will unfold over decades as these children grow into adults with higher rates of reproductive cancers, immune system disorders, learning disabilities, and chronic health problems that can be traced back to their earliest chemical and medical exposures. Yet Betty continues to trust the medical system that created many of her family's health challenges, because that system provides the only framework she has for understanding health and illness. When her daughter develops allergies and respiratory problems that may stem from early chemical exposures, Betty seeks solutions from the same medical authorities whose earlier recommendations contributed to these problems. When she experiences ongoing gynecological complications from her delivery procedures, she accepts additional medical interventions rather than questioning the original practices that created her difficulties. This cycle of medical intervention creating problems that require additional medical intervention represents one of the most troubling aspects of 1950s healthcare: the system's inability to recognize or acknowledge the iatrogenic effects of its own practices. Medical authorities attribute complications to natural variation, genetic predisposition, or patient non-compliance rather than examining whether their confident interventions might be creating the very problems they claim to prevent. As you settle into deeper sleep tonight, protected by decades of medical learning that emerged from tragedies like Betty's, consider how much courage it took for her to continue trusting a system that failed her in so many ways while presenting those failures as scientific progress. Her faith in medical authority reflected not ignorance, but the rational human need to believe that professional expertise could protect her family from the uncertainties and dangers that have always threatened human health and happiness. The broader social environment of 1950s America reinforces Betty's faith in medical progress through cultural messages that present scientific innovation as the solution to age-old human problems. Television advertisements promise better living through chemistry. Magazine articles celebrate medical breakthroughs that will eliminate disease and suffering, and public health campaigns encourage trust in professional expertise over traditional folk wisdom. This cultural embrace of scientific authority makes questioning medical recommendations seem not just foolish, but dangerous, a rejection of progress that might harm her family's health and social standing. Betty's experience represents millions of women who navigated pregnancy and motherhood during an era when medical confidence far exceeded medical knowledge, when pharmaceutical marketing disguised itself as scientific research, when institutional efficiency took precedence over biological wisdom. Their trust in medical authority reflected hope rather than naivety, rational adaptation to the best available information rather than blind faith in professional infallibility. As Betty's daughter grows from infant to toddler to school-age child, the early medical interventions that shaped her first days and months continue to influence her development in ways that become increasingly apparent to both family and medical providers. The DES exposure from her mother's pregnancy begins to manifest in subtle reproductive abnormalities that pediatric examinations identify as variations requiring medical monitoring. Her immune system, compromised by early formula feeding and chemical exposures, struggles with frequent infections and allergic reactions that demand ongoing pharmaceutical intervention. The learning difficulties that emerge during her early school years may stem from the radiation exposure she received in utero, the chemical burden she accumulated during infancy, or the neurological effects of maternal medications during labor and delivery. Medical authorities address these challenges through educational interventions and behavioral medications rather than investigating potential connections to early medical exposures, because the tools for understanding such complex causation simply don't exist in the 1950s and early 1960s. Betty watches her daughter struggle with health and developmental challenges that seem to require constant medical attention, never suspecting that many of these problems might stem from the very medical interventions that were meant to protect her child's health. The confident recommendations that Dr. Hartwell provided during pregnancy now seem prescient rather than problematic, because the delayed consequences of those interventions appear as separate medical conditions requiring additional treatment rather than predictable results of earlier pharmaceutical exposure. The pattern of medical intervention creating problems that require additional medical intervention becomes a defining feature of both Betty's and her daughter's ongoing relationship with the healthcare system. Each new symptom, each emerging health challenge, each developmental difficulty is addressed through the same framework of professional expertise and pharmaceutical solutions that created many of the underlying problems. The system's inability to recognize its own iatrogenic effects ensures that the cycle of intervention and complication continues across generations. As Betty enters middle age, her own health reflects the long-term consequences of 1950s medical practices that seemed beneficial at the time but created lasting damage to her reproductive and general health. The hormonal medications she took during pregnancy and recovery altered her body's natural hormonal balance in ways that increase her risk of breast cancer, blood clots, and other complications that won't be linked to DES exposure until decades after she took the medication. Her surgical delivery experiences created ongoing pelvic problems that affect her quality of life and require ongoing medical management. The episiotomy that Dr. Hartwell performed to prevent natural tearing created scar tissue and nerve damage that causes chronic pain and sexual dysfunction throughout Betty's adult life. The routine nature of this procedure in the 1950s obstetrics meant that these complications were considered normal consequences of childbirth rather than preventable injuries caused by unnecessary surgical intervention. Betty accepts these ongoing problems as natural results of aging and motherhood rather than questioning the medical practices that created them. Her daughter's adolescence brings the most dramatic revelation of early medical consequences when she develops clear cell adenocarcinoma of the vagina at age 16, a rare cancer that medical researchers have just begun to link to maternal DES exposure during pregnancy. The diagnosis devastates Betty and her family, not just because of the cancer's severity, but because of the growing realization that trusted medical treatments may have caused this life-threatening disease. The emerging research on DES and cancer represents one of the first major acknowledgments by the medical establishment that confident pharmaceutical interventions can create severe delayed consequences that take decades to manifest. For Betty, this revelation brings not just grief about her daughter's illness, but profound guilt about her own role in accepting medical recommendations that may have endangered her child's life. The trust she placed in Dr. Hartwell's expertise now seems naive and dangerous, yet at the time it represented rational faith in the best available medical knowledge. As you breathe slowly and peacefully tonight, surrounded by the safety that comes from decades of pharmaceutical testing and medical research, remember the courage of families like Betty's who lived through the devastating consequences of medical overconfidence and pharmaceutical experimentation disguised as established treatment. Their experiences of delayed toxicity and multi-generational health effects provided the tragic evidence that led to more careful testing requirements, longer observation periods, and greater humility about the limitations of medical knowledge. The broader community of DES mothers and daughters that emerges during the 1970s and 1980s creates a new model for patient advocacy and medical accountability that challenges the unquestioning trust in medical authority that characterized earlier decades. These women organize support groups, fund independent research, and demand answers from medical authorities who had confidently prescribed medications without adequate safety testing. Their activism represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between patients and medical providers, from passive acceptance of professional recommendations to active participation in medical decision-making. Betty's experience of living through her daughter's cancer treatment and recovery transforms her understanding of medical authority and patient responsibility in ways that influence how she approaches healthcare for the rest of her life. She learns to ask questions about medications and procedures, to seek second opinions for major medical decisions, and to research treatments independently rather than relying solely on professional recommendations. This transformation from trusting patient to informed consumer reflects broader cultural changes that the DES tragedy helped to accelerate. The long shadows. The story of Betty and her daughter represents just one family's experience within a much larger pattern of medical experimentation and pharmaceutical marketing that characterized mid-20th century American healthcare. During the same era when DES was being prescribed to prevent miscarriage, other confident medical interventions were creating their own patterns of delayed harm. Thalidomide causing birth defects in children whose mothers took the medication for morning sickness, radiation treatments for benign conditions causing cancers decades later, hormone replacement therapies increasing risks of breast cancer and blood clots in women who trusted medical promises of improved health and vitality. Each of these medical disasters followed a similar pattern. Innovative treatments developed by pharmaceutical companies, marketed to medical professionals as scientific breakthroughs, prescribed confidently by physicians who trusted industry research, accepted gratefully by patients who believed in medical progress, and revealed decades later to cause severe harm that could have been prevented through more careful testing and longer observation periods. The gap between medical confidence and medical knowledge created opportunities for commercial interests to influence medical practice in ways that prioritized profit over patient safety. The regulatory environment of the 1950s provided minimal oversight of pharmaceutical safety and medical practice, allowing medications to reach the market based on limited testing and theoretical benefits rather than comprehensive safety studies. The Food and Drug Administration had limited authority to require long-term safety data, and medical professionals had few incentives to report adverse effects or question established treatment protocols. This regulatory gap created conditions where experimental treatments could be presented as established medical practice without adequate evidence of safety or effectiveness. Betty's trust in Dr. Hartwell reflected not just personal faith in her physician, but broader cultural assumptions about scientific progress and professional expertise that made questioning medical authority seem both ungrateful and dangerous. The post-war optimism that characterized American society during the 1950s included confidence that scientific research and technological innovation would solve age-old human problems, that industrial progress would improve lives in ways that traditional approaches could never achieve. This cultural optimism created fertile ground for pharmaceutical marketing that presented chemical solutions as improvements over natural biological processes, that framed medical intervention as progress rather than experimentation, that transformed theoretical benefits into confident clinical recommendations. The advertising campaigns that promoted DES, thalidomide, and other problematic medications exploited both professional ambition and patient hope, promising outcomes that rigorous testing had never demonstrated and minimizing risks that careful observation would have revealed. As you rest comfortably in your bed tonight, protected by the regulatory frameworks and testing requirements that emerged from tragedies like Betty's, consider how much of what seemed like scientific certainty in the 1950s was actually commercial manipulation disguised as medical research. The confident recommendations that shaped Betty's pregnancy and childbirth experience reflected not the triumph of medical science, but the successful marketing of pharmaceutical products to physicians who lacked the tools and incentives necessary to evaluate their safety independently. The DES story also reveals how gender bias in medical research and practice created particular vulnerabilities for women like Betty, who trusted medical authorities with decisions about reproduction and childbearing. The medical establishment of the 1950s was overwhelmingly male and often dismissive of women's experiences and concerns about their own bodies. Pharmaceutical research focused primarily on male subjects, assuming that findings could be extrapolated to women without considering how hormonal differences might affect drug metabolism and safety. Women's reproductive health became a particular target for pharmaceutical intervention during the post-war era, as medical authorities sought to control and optimize biological processes that had previously been managed through family knowledge and community support. The medicalization of pregnancy, childbirth, and infant care created markets for pharmaceutical products while undermining traditional practices that had supported women and babies for thousands of years. Betty's experience of surrendering control over her pregnancy and childbirth to medical authorities represents a broader pattern of women losing agency over their own reproductive experiences in exchange for promises of improved outcomes through professional management. The twilight sleep that eliminated her consciousness during delivery, the feeding schedules that separated her from her baby, the pharmaceutical interventions that replaced natural processes, all of these reflected medical assumptions that women's bodies and instincts were inadequate for managing reproduction successfully. The tragedy of DES and similar pharmaceutical disasters lies not just in their immediate health consequences, but in their revelation of how commercial interests could exploit medical authority and patient trust to conduct profitable experiments disguised as established treatment. The confident physicians who prescribed these medications genuinely believed they were providing beneficial care, yet their confidence rested on marketing claims rather than rigorous safety data, on theoretical benefits rather than demonstrated outcomes. Tonight, as you prepare for peaceful sleep, surrounded by the safety that comes from hard-won medical wisdom and regulatory protection, remember the families like Betty's, whose suffering provided the evidence that led to more careful pharmaceutical testing, more honest acknowledgement of medical uncertainty, and greater respect for patients' rights to make informed decisions about their own health care. Their experiences of betrayed trust and delayed harm created the foundation for medical practices that prioritize safety over innovation, patient welfare over commercial profit, and honest uncertainty over false confidence. By the 1970s and 1980s, as medical researchers began to understand the connections between DES exposure and reproductive cancers, Betty found herself part of an unexpected community. Thousands of women who had trusted their doctors' recommendations during pregnancy, and now watched their daughters face life-threatening consequences of that trust. This community of DES mothers represented something new in American medical culture. Patients who organized to demand accountability from medical authorities who had failed to protect them from pharmaceutical harm. The DES action groups that formed across the country created spaces where women like Betty could share their experiences of medical betrayal, their guilt about unknowingly exposing their children to cancer-causing medications, and their anger at medical and pharmaceutical authorities who had presented experimental treatments as established medical practice. These gatherings represented a fundamental challenge to traditional medical authority, as patients began to organize independently of professional guidance and to demand answers that medical authorities were reluctant to provide. Betty's participation in DES action introduced her to concepts that transformed her understanding of medical practice and patient responsibility-informed consent, pharmaceutical lobbying, regulatory capture, and the difference between medical marketing and genuine scientific research. She learned that the confident recommendations she had received from Dr. Hartwell were based on studies funded by pharmaceutical companies rather than independent research, that medical journals had published promotional materials disguised as scientific papers, that regulatory agencies had approved medications based on limited testing that ignored potential long-term consequences. This education in medical politics and pharmaceutical marketing revealed to Betty how thoroughly commercial interests had penetrated medical practice during the 1950s, how trusted physicians had become unwitting agents of pharmaceutical promotion, how regulatory agencies had failed to protect patients from profitable experiments presented as beneficial treatments. The revelation that her daughter's cancer stemmed from a preventable exposure to a medication that should never have been approved transformed Betty's relationship with medical authority from trust to vigilant skepticism. The legal battles that emerged from the DES tragedy created new frameworks for holding pharmaceutical companies accountable for the long-term consequences of their products, for requiring more comprehensive safety testing before medications reach the market, and for compensating families harmed by medical treatments that were presented as safe but later proved dangerous. These lawsuits revealed internal pharmaceutical company documents showing that manufacturers knew about potential cancer risks but continued to market DES to pregnant women while suppressing safety concerns. Betty's testimony in these legal proceedings forced her to confront the full scope of how thoroughly she and her daughter had been betrayed by trusted medical authorities. The pharmaceutical executives who had marketed DES knew that their safety data was inadequate, but continued to promote the medication to physicians who trusted industry claims about its benefits. The medical professionals who prescribed DES relied on pharmaceutical marketing rather than independent research to guide their treatment recommendations. The regulatory agencies that approved DES failed to require the long-term safety studies that would have revealed its cancer-causing potential. As you breathe peacefully tonight, protected by the legal frameworks and regulatory requirements that emerged from tragedies like Betty's, consider how much courage it took for these families to challenge medical and pharmaceutical authorities who possessed enormous resources and professional credibility. Their willingness to speak publicly about their experiences of medical harm, to demand accountability from trusted institutions, and to organize politically for better protection of future patients created lasting changes in how medical research is conducted and how pharmaceutical safety is evaluated. The scientific research that finally established the connection between DES exposure and reproductive cancers represented a triumph of independent investigation over industry-funded studies, of long-term observation over short-term marketing claims, of patient advocacy over professional authority. The researchers who conducted these studies faced resistance from medical authorities who were reluctant to acknowledge that confident treatment recommendations had been based on inadequate evidence, that trusted medications had caused preventable harm, that the medical profession had failed to protect patients from pharmaceutical experimentation. Betty's daughter's recovery from her DES-related cancer became part of a broader story of medical learning that emerged from pharmaceutical tragedy. The treatment protocols that saved her life reflected decades of research funded partly by DES action groups who demanded that medical authorities address the consequences of their earlier failures. The surgical techniques, radiation therapies, and chemotherapy regimens that offered hope to DES daughters represented medical knowledge that had been purchased with the suffering of families who trusted medical recommendations that proved to be dangerously wrong. The support networks that sustained families through DES-related cancers created new models for patient advocacy and medical accountability that influenced how other communities responded to pharmaceutical harm and medical negligence. The organizing strategies, legal approaches, and research methodologies developed by DES action groups provided templates for advocacy around other medical disasters. Veterans exposed to Agent Orange, communities affected by environmental toxins, patients harmed by defective medical devices. Betty's experience of living through her daughter's cancer treatment while simultaneously organizing for medical accountability transformed her understanding of her own agency and responsibility within medical relationships. She learned to research treatments independently, to seek second opinions for major medical decisions, to ask detailed questions about medication safety, and to demand honest acknowledgement of medical uncertainty rather than false confidence from healthcare providers. This transformation from trusting patient to informed advocate represents one of the most significant changes in American medical culture that emerged from pharmaceutical tragedies of the mid-20th century. The generation of patients who lived through DES, thalidomide, and other medical disasters created new expectations for medical transparency, pharmaceutical accountability, and patient participation in medical decision-making that continue to influence healthcare relationships today. The measure of progress. As Betty reflects on her family's medical journey during her later years, she carries with her a complex understanding of medical progress that encompasses both genuine advances in healthcare and the tragic consequences of pharmaceutical overconfidence that characterized her earlier experiences. Her daughter's survival of DES-related cancer represents real progress in cancer treatment that emerged from decades of research, funded partly by families like hers, who demanded that medical authorities address the consequences of their earlier failures. The surgical techniques, radiation therapies, and supportive care that enabled her daughter's recovery reflect genuine scientific advances that saved lives and reduced suffering in ways that were impossible during the 1950s. Yet Betty also understands that much of what seemed like medical progress during her pregnancy in 1954 actually represented pharmaceutical marketing disguised as scientific advancement, confident interventions based on theoretical assumptions rather than careful safety testing, and institutional practices that prioritized efficiency over biological wisdom. The twilight sleep that promised painless childbirth eliminated her consciousness during one of the most significant experiences of her life. The routine episiotomy that was meant to prevent natural tearing created ongoing complications that affected her health for decades. The infant feeding practices that promised scientific nutrition interfered with natural processes that would have better served both her and her baby. The medications that filled her medicine cabinet during pregnancy, DEEs to prevent miscarriage, vitamins enhanced with synthetic additives, sedatives to manage anxiety, represented a faith in pharmaceutical solutions that ignored the possibility that chemical intervention might create more problems than it solved. The X-rays that monitored her baby's development exposed both of them to radiation levels that would be considered dangerous by later medical standards. The hospital environment that seemed so modern and scientific stripped away the family support and natural comfort measures that had sustained women through childbirth for thousands of years. Betty's granddaughters, born in the 1980s and 1990s, experience pregnancy and childbirth in a medical environment that has been transformed by the lessons learned from her generation's suffering. These younger women have access to ultrasound technology that provides safe imaging of developing babies, to evidence-based guidelines that distinguish between beneficial interventions and unnecessary procedures, to birthing options that honor both medical safety and natural biological processes. Their prenatal care includes careful evaluation of medication safety, respect for normal variations in pregnancy progress, and support for natural feeding relationships between mothers and babies. The regulatory environment that protects Betty's granddaughters reflects legal and scientific frameworks that emerged directly from pharmaceutical disasters like the DES tragedy. New medications must undergo years of safety testing that includes long-term observation of potential consequences. Pharmaceutical companies must disclose potential risks honestly rather than presenting theoretical benefits as established facts. Medical professionals receive training in evidence-based practice that emphasizes careful evaluation of treatment benefits and risks rather than confidence in the latest pharmaceutical innovations. Yet Betty recognizes that medical progress remains an ongoing process of learning from mistakes rather than a linear advance toward perfect knowledge and optimal treatments. The confidence that characterized 1950s medical practice has been replaced not by complete certainty, but by greater humility about the limitations of medical knowledge and more honest acknowledgement of uncertainty in medical decision-making. This evolution represents genuine progress, even though it means that patients must accept more responsibility for evaluating medical recommendations rather than trusting completely in professional authority. The consumer safety regulations that now protect families from the chemical hazards that surrounded Betty's daughter's infancy reflect another form of progress that emerged from recognition of past failures. Lead paint has been banned from children's products, asbestos has been removed from consumer goods, and chemical additives in food and consumer products undergo safety testing before approval for use. These protections represent collective learning from the experiences of families who discovered too late that products marketed as safe and modern actually contained dangerous compounds that accumulated in their bodies over decades. As you settle deeper into sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety that comes from hard-won knowledge about pharmaceutical risks and chemical hazards, consider how much of what we now consider basic consumer protection emerged from the suffering of families like Betty's, who trusted in promises of progress that masked dangerous experimentation. Their experiences of betrayed trust and delayed harm created the evidence and political pressure necessary to establish regulatory frameworks that better protect current and future generations from similar tragedies. Betty's understanding of medical progress includes recognition that genuine advances in healthcare must be distinguished from pharmaceutical marketing, that patient safety requires independent evaluation of treatment claims rather than trust in commercial promises, and that medical knowledge advances through careful observation of long-term outcomes rather than confident application of theoretical benefits. This wisdom, purchased through personal and family suffering, represents a form of progress that extends beyond technical medical advances to include better relationships between patients and providers, more honest acknowledgement of medical limitations, and greater respect for the biological wisdom that has sustained human health for millions of years. The medical culture that now guides her granddaughter's healthcare reflects this broader understanding of progress as involving not just technological innovation, but also greater humility about medical limitations, more honest communication about treatment uncertainties, and deeper respect for patients' rights to make informed decisions about their own bodies. The informed consent processes that now precede major medical interventions, the patient advocacy resources that help families evaluate treatment options, and the support for natural approaches to pregnancy and childbirth all represent forms of progress that honor both scientific knowledge and human wisdom. Betty's story, multiplied across millions of families who lived through the pharmaceutical experimentation of the mid-20th century, created the foundation for medical practices that prioritize safety over innovation, patient welfare over commercial profit, and honest uncertainty over false confidence. Her experience of trusting medical authority completely and learning to question medical recommendations thoughtfully represents a form of progress that benefits every subsequent generation of patients who face medical decisions with better information, stronger protections, and greater agency in determining their own health care. The suburban Minneapolis house where Betty raised her family still stands today, though it has been renovated multiple times to remove the lead paint that once covered its walls and to replace the asbestos insulation that once filled its heating ducts. The nursery where her daughter spent her earliest months has been converted to other uses, but Betty sometimes stands in that room and remembers the confidence with which she arranged the crib and changing table, chose the baby products that seemed so modern and safe, and prepared to welcome her child into a world that she believed was becoming safer and healthier through scientific progress. The medicine cabinet in Betty's bathroom, once filled with the hormones and vitamins that Dr. Hartwell prescribed during her pregnancy, now contains fewer medications and more questions about their necessity. Her experience of living through pharmaceutical tragedy taught her to research treatments independently, to seek second opinions for major medical decisions, and to ask detailed questions about medication safety rather than accepting professional recommendations without evaluation. This transformation from trusting patient to informed consumer reflects broader cultural changes in medical relationships that emerged from her generation's experience of betrayed trust. The hospital where Betty gave birth has also been transformed, though it continues to serve families in her community. The delivery rooms now accommodate family members during labor and birth, support natural approaches to pain management alongside pharmaceutical options, and encourage early bonding between mothers and babies rather than routine separation. The nursery practices that once separated newborns from their mothers for days have been replaced with rooming-in arrangements that honor the biological imperative for mothers and babies to remain close together after birth. These changes represent genuine progress that emerged from recognition of past mistakes rather than simply new technologies or pharmaceutical innovations. The evidence that routine episiotomy increased rather than decreased complications led to more conservative surgical practices during delivery. The research showing that early separation interfered with breastfeeding and bonding led to family-centered maternity care that supports natural processes. The discovery that many routine medications during pregnancy created more risks than benefits led to more careful evaluation of pharmaceutical safety for pregnant women. Betty's daughter, now a middle-aged woman with teenagers of her own, approaches medical decisions with the skepticism and research skills that her family's experience taught her. Her own pregnancies during the 1980s benefited from the regulatory changes and medical humility that emerged from DES and other pharmaceutical tragedies. She received careful counseling about her increased cancer risks from maternal DES exposure, underwent enhanced screening throughout her pregnancies, and made informed decisions about prenatal care that balanced medical safety with respect for natural biological processes. The granddaughters who represent the next generation of Betty's family grow up in a world where consumer protection and pharmaceutical regulation reflect decades of learning from past mistakes. Their toys are tested for chemical safety, their food is regulated for additive content, and their medical care is guided by evidence-based practices rather than theoretical assumptions. Yet they also inherit the ongoing challenge of distinguishing between genuine medical advances and commercial marketing, between necessary interventions and profitable procedures. Betty's participation in DES action during the 1980s and 1990s connected her with researchers who were working to understand the biological mechanisms through which pharmaceutical exposures during pregnancy could affect children's health decades later. This research revealed not just the specific effects of DES, but broader principles about how environmental exposures during critical developmental periods could influence health outcomes throughout life. These discoveries contributed to the emerging field of environmental health that now guides public policy about chemical exposures, consumer product safety, and pharmaceutical regulation. The legal settlements that compensated families harmed by DES created precedents for holding pharmaceutical companies accountable for the long-term consequences of their products, for requiring more comprehensive safety testing before medications reach the market, and for providing resources for treating complications that emerge from pharmaceutical harm. These legal frameworks continue to influence how new medications are tested, how pharmaceutical risks are communicated, and how patients harmed by medical treatments can seek compensation and accountability. As you breathe slowly and peacefully in your comfortable bed tonight, protected by the regulatory frameworks and testing requirements that emerged from tragedies like Betty's, consider how much courage it took for her generation to transform their experiences of medical betrayal into advocacy for better protection of future patients. Their willingness to speak publicly about pharmaceutical harm, to challenge medical authority when it failed to protect them, and to organize politically for regulatory change created lasting improvements in how medical research is conducted and how pharmaceutical safety is evaluated. Betty's story represents not just personal tragedy, but collective learning that continues to influence medical practice and pharmaceutical regulation today. The humility about medical limitations that now characterizes better medical practice, the respect for patient autonomy that guides informed consent processes, and the recognition that natural biological processes often work better than pharmaceutical intervention all reflect lessons learned from her generation's experience of misplaced trust in medical authority. The wisdom that Betty gained through her family's suffering, to question medical recommendations rather than accepting them blindly, to research treatments independently rather than relying solely on professional authority, to balance medical intervention with respect for natural processes, represents knowledge that benefits every subsequent generation of patients who face medical decisions with better information and stronger protections than were available during the pharmaceutical experimentation of the 1950s. As Betty enters her final years, her understanding of medical progress encompasses both the genuine advances that have improved health outcomes and the recognition that medical hubris continues to threaten patient safety in new forms. The pharmaceutical industry that created DES and other dangerous medications during the 1950s has evolved but not fundamentally changed its priorities, continuing to market new products based on limited safety data while emphasizing potential benefits over possible risks. The medical profession that confidently prescribed experimental treatments disguised as established practice has developed better research methods, but retains cultural pressures to project certainty even in the face of uncertainty. Betty watches her granddaughters navigate contemporary medical decisions with the same basic challenges that she faced during pregnancy in 1954. How to distinguish between beneficial treatments and profitable marketing, how to balance trust in professional expertise with healthy skepticism about commercial interests, how to make informed decisions about medical interventions when complete information about long-term consequences may not be available for decades. The specific medications and procedures have changed, but the fundamental tension between patient welfare and commercial profit remains a defining feature of American healthcare. The opioid crisis that affects communities across America during Betty's later years represents a contemporary version of the pharmaceutical overconfidence that characterized her own medical experiences. Medications that were marketed as safe and effective solutions to pain management have created addiction epidemics that destroy families and communities, revealing once again how pharmaceutical marketing can disguise dangerous products as medical advances. The confident prescribing practices that created opioid dependence in millions of patients reflect the same faith in pharmaceutical solutions over careful evaluation of risks and benefits that led to widespread DES prescribing during the 1950s. Betty recognizes in contemporary pharmaceutical controversies the same patterns that characterized her own experience. Medications approved based on limited safety data, marketing campaigns that emphasize benefits while minimizing risks, medical professionals who trust industry claims rather than conducting independent evaluation, regulatory agencies that prioritize pharmaceutical industry interests over patient protection. These recurring patterns suggest that the fundamental problems that created pharmaceutical disasters during the 1950s have not been fully resolved despite decades of regulatory reform and medical education. The environmental health challenges that affect her granddaughter's generation reflect another form of the chemical optimism that characterized 1950s consumer culture. New synthetic compounds continue to enter the marketplace faster than their safety can be adequately evaluated, creating ongoing experiments in human exposure to chemicals whose long-term effects remain unknown. The confidence with which new plastics, pesticides, food additives, and consumer products are marketed as safe improvements over traditional alternatives echoes the pharmaceutical confidence that led to DES and other medical disasters. Yet Betty also recognizes genuine progress in how medical knowledge is developed and communicated, how pharmaceutical research is conducted and regulated, and how patients participate in medical decision-making. The evidence-based medicine movement that now guides better medical practice emphasizes careful evaluation of treatment outcomes rather than theoretical assumptions about pharmaceutical benefits. The informed consent processes that precede medical interventions provide patients with more honest information about treatment risks and benefits than was available during her own medical experiences. The patient advocacy movements that emerged from pharmaceutical tragedies like DES have created ongoing pressure for medical transparency, pharmaceutical accountability, and patient participation in medical research and policymaking. These advocacy networks continue to monitor pharmaceutical safety, challenge inadequate regulatory oversight, and demand better protection for patients who participate in medical research or receive new treatments. Their ongoing vigilance reflects recognition that the commercial interests that created past pharmaceutical disasters remain powerful forces in contemporary medical practice. As you prepare for peaceful sleep tonight, surrounded by the imperfect but real protections that emerged from the suffering of families like Betty's, consider how their experiences created not just regulatory changes, but ongoing awareness of the need for patient vigilance in medical relationships. Their transformation from trusting patients to informed advocates represents a form of progress that requires constant renewal, as each generation faces new forms of medical overconfidence and pharmaceutical marketing that disguise commercial interests as scientific advancement. Betty's final understanding of medical progress encompasses both gratitude for genuine advances in healthcare and recognition that patient safety requires ongoing skepticism about medical authority, careful evaluation of pharmaceutical claims, and respect for the biological wisdom that has sustained human health for millions of years. Her story represents not just historical tragedy, but ongoing reminder of the need for medical humility, pharmaceutical accountability, and patient advocacy in protecting public health from commercial interests that prioritize profit over human welfare. The lessons embedded in Betty's experience to question confident medical recommendations, to research treatments independently, to balance intervention with respect for natural processes, to organize collectively for better protection from pharmaceutical harm, remain relevant for every generation of patients who must navigate medical decisions in a commercial healthcare system that continues to prioritize innovation over safety, marketing over transparency, and profit over patient welfare. Her legacy lives not just in the regulatory frameworks and legal precedents that emerged from her family's suffering, but in the ongoing awareness that medical progress requires patient vigilance as much as professional expertise, that pharmaceutical safety demands independent evaluation rather than trust in commercial claims, and that genuine healthcare advances must be distinguished from marketing innovations that serve commercial rather than human interests. As we return from 1950s Minneapolis, perhaps we can carry with us something more than just another historical tale to ease us into sleep. Betty's story speaks across 70 years to remind us that the distance between her circumstances and our comfortable beds reflects not inevitable progress, but specific choices made by countless individuals who decided that human dignity matters more than efficiency, that patient safety deserves priority over pharmaceutical profit, and that medical uncertainty should be acknowledged honestly rather than disguised as scientific confidence. The tragedy of Betty's experience lies not in any malicious intent from medical providers like Dr. Hartwell, who genuinely believed they were offering the best possible care, but in the systematic gaps between medical confidence and medical knowledge that allowed commercial interests to exploit professional authority and patient trust. The medications that endangered Betty and her daughter were developed by scientists working in legitimate laboratories, approved by regulatory agencies following established procedures, and prescribed by physicians who trusted in professional education and peer-reviewed research. Yet these seemingly credible processes masked fundamental inadequacies in safety testing, regulatory oversight, and long-term outcome evaluation that created conditions for pharmaceutical experimentation disguised as medical care. Betty's transformation from trusting patient to informed advocate represents a form of progress that extends beyond her individual experience to encompass broader changes in medical culture that benefit every subsequent generation of patients. The patient advocacy movements that emerged from pharmaceutical tragedies like DEIS created ongoing pressure for medical transparency, honest communication about treatment uncertainties, and greater patient participation in medical decision-making. These changes represent genuine advances in medical practice that honor both scientific knowledge and human agency, both professional expertise and patient wisdom. The regulatory frameworks that now protect pregnant women from the pharmaceutical dangers that Betty faced emerged directly from her generation's willingness to speak publicly about medical harm, to challenge professional authority when it failed to protect patients, and to organize politically for better oversight of pharmaceutical safety. The testing requirements that new medications must meet, the disclosure obligations that pharmaceutical companies must fulfill, and the informed consent processes that precede medical interventions all reflect legal and scientific frameworks that were built upon the evidence of pharmaceutical harm that families like Betty's provided through their suffering. Yet Betty's story also reminds us that medical progress remains an ongoing process of learning from mistakes rather than a linear advance toward perfect knowledge and optimal treatments. The confidence that characterized 1950s medical practice has been replaced not by complete certainty, but by greater humility about the limitations of medical knowledge and more honest acknowledgement of uncertainty in medical decision-making. This evolution represents genuine progress, even though it requires patients to accept more responsibility for evaluating medical recommendations rather than trusting completely in professional authority. The consumer safety regulations that now protect families from the chemical hazards that surrounded Betty's daily life during pregnancy reflect another form of progress that emerged from recognition of past failures. The lead paint, asbestos products, and chemical additives that created hidden health risks for her family have been largely eliminated from consumer products through regulatory frameworks that require safety testing before approval for public use. These protections represent collective learning from the experiences of families who discovered too late that products marketed as safe and modern actually contained dangerous compounds that accumulated in their bodies over decades. Feel grateful tonight for the decades of careful research and tragic experience that now guide prenatal care toward evidence-based practices that support, rather than interfere, with natural biological processes. The ultrasound technology that provides safe imaging of developing babies, the nutritional guidelines that honor normal appetite and weight gain during pregnancy, and the birthing practices that support family bonding while maintaining medical safety all represent genuine advances that learned from the mistakes of Betty's era rather than simply replacing old interventions with new ones. The medical culture that now guides contemporary pregnancy care reflects broader understanding that genuine healthcare advances must be distinguished from pharmaceutical marketing, that patient safety requires independent evaluation of treatment claims rather than trust in commercial promises, and that medical knowledge advances through careful observation of long-term outcomes rather than confident application of theoretical benefits. This wisdom, purchased through the suffering of families like Betty's, represents a form of progress that extends beyond technical medical advances to include better relationships between patients and providers, more honest communication about medical limitations, and greater respect for the biological wisdom that has sustained human health for millions of years. Betty's experience of learning to question medical recommendations while still appreciating genuine medical advances represents a balance that every generation of patients must achieve in navigating commercial healthcare systems that continue to prioritize innovation over safety, marketing over transparency, and profit over patient welfare. Her transformation from trusting patient to informed advocate provides a model for how individuals can protect themselves and their families from medical overconfidence while still benefiting from legitimate scientific advances that improve health outcomes. The ongoing challenges that face contemporary patients, distinguishing between beneficial treatments and profitable procedures, evaluating pharmaceutical claims independently rather than accepting them uncritically, balancing medical intervention with respect for natural processes, reflect the same fundamental tensions between patient welfare and commercial interests that characterized Betty's medical experiences. Her story reminds us that patient safety requires not just better regulations and medical education, but ongoing vigilance from individuals and communities who refuse to accept medical authority without evaluation, pharmaceutical claims without evidence, or commercial innovation without consideration of long-term consequences. As you settle into the deepest phases of sleep tonight, surrounded by the safety that comes from hard-won knowledge about pharmaceutical risks and medical limitations, carry with you Betty's hard-earned wisdom. That genuine medical progress requires both scientific advancement and human humility, both professional expertise and patient advocacy, both respect for medical knowledge and recognition of its limitations. Her story represents not just historical tragedy, but ongoing reminder that protecting human health requires constant vigilance against the commercial forces that would exploit medical authority for profit rather than serving the human welfare that should guide all medical practice. Sleep now, dear listener, and remember that the distance between Betty's vulnerability and your current safety reflects not inevitable progress, but the specific choices of individuals who decided that pharmaceutical accountability matters more than commercial convenience, that patient welfare deserves priority over professional authority, and that medical humility serves human health better than confident application of inadequately tested interventions. Until we meet again in another quiet corner of history, may your dreams carry the recognition that every generation must choose between commercial interests and human welfare, between profitable innovation and patient safety, between medical confidence and honest acknowledgement of uncertainty. If you found comfort in this journey through history's shadows, please consider subscribing to join our community of gentle souls who believe the most important stories are often the hardest ones to hear. Like and share if this tale has touched your heart, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. There's something magical about knowing our little corner of history reaches around the world to bring people together in understanding and compassion. Your engagement helps ensure these crucial stories continue to reach families who can learn from the past to better protect their own health and that of future generations. Good night, and may your sleep be as peaceful as Betty's final years, when she could rest knowing that her family's suffering had contributed to knowledge and protections that would spare countless other families from similar tragedies. May your dreams be filled with gratitude for the advocates who transformed their pain into progress, their betrayed trust into better protections, and their personal losses into collective wisdom that continues to guard human health against the commercial forces that would prioritize profit over the sacred responsibility to first do no harm.